Hi out there again. I am the Baldy.
And I am the Beardy.
Beardy. And we're gonna do a different kind of review this time around. We're gonna try to do last week for the 32nd anniversary of the 1984 Ghostbusters. They re-released the movie in theaters for a couple nights, and I went and saw it with my wife. Awesome night. We both loved the movie. We were both happy to see it that way. And it's hard for me to review that movie without a bias because it's been ingrained in my DNA since I was probably 8 years old.
It's in his dinner.
Yeah, it's in my dinner. Follow up from the last review that we just did. So instead of doing the typical thing like we would normally do, the Beardy over here, he only just saw the movie for the first time a couple years ago. And since I've seen it since I was young and he just saw it, we thought we'd do a different kind of review where it's, does it add up? Does it still work for someone who, you know, I was raised on it, like I said, he just saw it. So, you know, is it a movie that you would look at the same way as I do? Or is it a movie where you're just like, well, I saw it, I accomplished one thing on my checklist to do in life, or maybe you didn't even want to see it. So anyway, 1984 Ghostbusters, what I would consider a classic, directed by Ivan Reitman, starring Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, Sigourney Weaver, Ernie Hudson, and Rick Moranis. And yeah, I consider it a classic. I only know of a few minor things I would change if I could change it. But for the most part, I feel like it's one of those movies that the story is simple and the jokes and whatnot are kind of like around that framework. And so one of the things about Ghostbusters that has always bothered me, and this is more in people who want to classify the movie, it was classified as a comedy, and I personally don't feel it's really a comedy. I always felt it was like an adventure supernatural movie, and it has comedy as elements of it. I think people get too blinded by Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, and you know, these people were on SNL or Saturday Night Live, and Harold Ramis was also involved in comedy and whatnot up to that point. Ivan Reitman was a director of comedies in the 80s, and that's how he got his start. And people just look at it as, well, the pedigree is comedy. But to me, I'm like, that I feel like is a disservice, personally.
I can agree with that.
I feel like the movie takes itself seriously. It establishes its own rules. It establishes the world. It tries to be grounded in the real world, and the funny stuff only happens as a result of something happening compared to it being like watching the movie, they're doing something stupid in order to get a punchline or to get a laugh.
Right.
So I think that's my opening thing about it, is that. So take it away. Let me know what you thought.
So when I moved back to the area 5 years ago, one of the first things Sean and I did was watch that movie. I think it was in the first couple of weeks I moved back.
I was like,
came
you've
over.
never seen
Yeah, and it's one of those movies where it was never something that I intentionally missed. You know, I grew up, some stuff just didn't fly in our house, and like we discussed in the Zootopia trailer, you know, everybody's different backgrounds and everything, and that's okay. So it was just one of those things that just didn't happen for me as a kid. You know, and when we talked about this, what the types of things we like, I'm more kind of fantasy, sword and sorcery adventure. You've got other leanings, and I know Ghostbusters has been a big part of your life. Another one of my friends that I've known almost as long as you was also a huge part of his life. And for some reason, I missed it. My brother did take me to see Ghostbusters 2 a couple years later, and that scared the living daylights. I was a very impressionable child. I mean, I would see a tabloid in the newspaper stand at the grocery store about like the blue voodoo devil living in the jungles, and I would have nightmares for weeks. So, I mean, Jabba freaked me out when I saw Return of the Jedi in theaters.
Yeah, the Rancor scared
me. The opening of Labyrinth scared me when all the goblins were packed in there. So maybe it was just my parents knew that this movie probably would have freaked me out. That said, I watched it with you when I first moved back to the area, and then a couple of years ago, before my mom moved to Florida, sorry Mom if I'm giving away a dirty little secret about you, I went to bed because I was exhausted. And
I remember
hear
this. You actually texted me. You're like, my mom's downstairs watching Ghostbusters.
my mom was watching Ghostbusters on the TV in the living room, and I could hear it coming. And it was making me smile because I'm like, it just cracked me up in the best possible ways. It's like, my mom is watching Ghostbusters. This
is good.
This is great.
Yeah.
And having only been a year or two since I had watched it, I kind of knew what she was experiencing there. Mm-hmm. So that said, I agree with you. It definitely stands up. I would also categorize it. I feel it is a timeless movie. I feel like you can go back and it still holds up, but it is definitively an 80s movie.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of movies that come out of the 80s that are so attached to that time. The 80s in America were such a time period that you see movies about the 70s and all this stuff. Whenever and you can see people kind of recapture it now, but when people try to make movies now that are set in the 80s, it doesn't quite feel as genuine as the actual 80s.
We just saw X-Men Apocalypse, and it's very much they're trying to just beat you over the head with references to be like, no, this is the 80s. Here's Duran Duran playing Hungry Like the Wolf in the background of the one scene, and the Michael Jackson get up on Nightcrawler and all that, and it's like this movie is very of its time, but it's timeless in that way too, where it isn't trying to be anything other than what it is in that way. And that's kind of why I still have that issue about it's not only a comedy, and it's got some of the most quotable lines in pop culture in the thing, some of which I use in conversation way more often than most people I think that are normal would.
Well, and I named a character in my comic book that's based off of one of the characters from Ghostbusters, because you always use that one.
Well, I can't help it. It's one of my. I do that to anytime something goes wrong. The first words out of my mouth is, "What did you do, Ray?" I can't help it. I don't care what boy, girl. You're Ray for that moment. And if I met Ray from Star Wars, it would be so easy to just say that constantly too. But anyway, the movie itself, like I said, the story is a very simple story. But what I love is, if you know the history of what they tried to do with this movie leading up to actually creating the movie that we have, it's amazing how stripped down it became in order to become the classic that we have. Because the original idea for it, Dan Aykroyd wanted to do like a time travel thing where the Ghostbusters were like a SWAT team, and he and John Belushi were going to do like a new Blues Brothers deal, and they would go through time, and I think they had like SWAT team outfits on instead, and they were gonna fight ghosts all over the place, and like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was the first of many they went up against. And when Ivan Reitman became attached to the project, he read it and he's like, there's no way we can get a budget for this. This is too off the charts. So they whittled it down, and Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis went off and they refined it into more of a working class show, or not show, but a working class movie, where it's about these three scientists who they study the paranormal. They're running around New York trying to anybody who has a ghost sighting, they're wanting to talk to them, or at least find a ghost and test their theory. Their theory is that they can possibly catch and contain ghosts. And through the incident in the beginning of the movie at the New York Public Library, where the Ray with his, now I got an idea, ready, get her, and they have the ghost like blows up on them, scares the hell out of them, and they're running out of it's like you have these guys who are supposed to be professional, and they're scared and running like crazy from what's going on. So that goes to show you, it's funny. But I love that would be realistic too. Yeah. It's like the humor is derived from what happens more than it's written for laughs, which is great. Yeah. But they end up getting kicked out of the university, and then Ray has his, I've been in the private sector, they expect results and all that. I love that too. That's another line I share with my friend Nathan all the time, because he worked for the state and I work for the magazine, and it's like I've been in the private sector since I got into the workforce. But they say, okay, this incident at the beginning of the movie with the ghost at the library, Egon has discovered there's a potential that we can actually like catch and contain these ghosts, and we can actually create our own business. And of course, Peter, played by Bill Murray, is all like, "Ooh, money? What did you say?" You know, and next thing you know, they're trying to buy a firehouse and raise mortgage to the hilt, and they create their business.
Ray's like the actual like responsible one, but he's also like the
most
big childish. Like I love that because I mean, I'm not gonna say I'm the most responsible.
Well, that's the thing.
But I
up until
like I'm the most childish.
up until you came back to the area, all of my friends, anytime we watch Ghostbusters, would say, "I'm Ray," because they're like that moment in the firehouse when they go and check out the firehouse for the first time, and like Ray or I'm sorry, Peter and Egon are meeting with the realtor, and she's asking them what they think, and Egon's like he says it's like they live in a demilitarized zone, and he thinks the whole neighborhood should be condemned, and the electrical work isn't sufficient for their power needs and all this other stuff, and he's a downer, and then out of nowhere you hear Ray going, "Hey, does this pole still work?" And he slides down the pole, and "Hey, did you try this pole? This place is great. I'm gonna get my stuff. We should stay here tonight, sleep here, to try it out." And you have all that stuff going on, and it's like that's him. I mean, I used to be that guy, but I'm probably more Peter around you than you are. Like you are Ray. You're Sonny, and that's all there is to it. But Ray, he's like there's been a lot of people out there who go, okay, well, who are each of the 4 Ghostbusters and what is their function? It's like you have Peter, who's basically the attitude and the voice of the Ghostbusters, and he's basically he's the front man. He's almost like the ringmaster or something. And then you have Egon, who is the mind of the Ghostbusters. He's the one that develops a lot of the equipment. He's the one who he's the empirical information guy out of the group.
He's the bass player.
I guess you could say I could see Egon being a bass player. And then you see Ray, and Ray is kind of the factoid guy. Mm-hmm. He's the one that he keeps dropping these little facts about about the Tunguska Blast of 1909 and the empirical book stacking in Philadelphia, the mass turbulence and all that. And he's that guy. He's the one that he has the knowledge, and he also has the passion. He's the heart of the Ghostbusters, as Peter says in the movie. And there's always been this question, who's Winston? And I figured it out the other night. Winston is us. Winston is anybody out there like me. I'm going to flat out say like me. Winston is the guy who has always, he's the guy that just answers the ad. And he becomes the audience by proxy. But what I love is he was the person to show me when I was 8 years old watching this movie, anybody can do this. Mm. And I just realized that the other night, because there's always been this, well, what is Winston if you think of it in that way? It's like Winston is everybody who ever wanted to strap an unlicensed nuclear accelerator on their back and not care that they might blow up because this is awesome. And so in that way, I actually love his character all the more for discovering that the other day. Like, he is me. He's like my avatar in this movie in a sense, and that just is awesome.
Yeah, I mean he's kind of the straight man in the movie.
He is.
When you go to the comic, it's like I mean he's got his funny moments and stuff.
Oh, he's got some of the best lines.
But he is. You're right. He is the Johnny Q. Public. He is the guy that you just go into it, and I love that. At least to my memory, it's been a while since I've watched it, and I clearly don't have it as well done as you do. But they don't really do. In the '80s, they could have very easily done this. I mean, when you look at movies like Crocodile Dundee and other things, like things now that you can't get away with in movies that are either socially unacceptable or like they don't really play up the whole race card for him as a character. Like he's just one of the guys.
I mean, originally the part was supposed to be Eddie Murphy's, and they were gonna have he was doing Beverly Hills Cop at the same time, so he just couldn't work, and they rewrote the character into Winston the way that he is in the movie. He was originally going to be part of the group from the beginning on, from what I understand of reading the background about it. And I'm actually glad it worked out the way it did, because in some ways I think Eddie Murphy would have eaten this thing alive, especially in that era. He would have been the guy everybody watched, and the other three guys would have just been, set dressing basically. Yeah. But yeah, I like. I mean, they have, there's three white guys. I love the fact that they at least put in here's an African American actor, and here's somebody who represents. In my opinion, and this might be me being racist, so, excuse me if I am or whatever, but when I thought of New York in the 80s, I always thought more African American than not, for some reason, in that era. I don't know why. I can't put my finger on it. But in that way, it made sense that they had someone who was just this working class guy. I love that, if there's a steady paycheck, I'll believe anything you say. I mean, it made sense that they would find somebody who, he's not a scientist like them and whatnot. They already have 3 scientists. So the fact that they got somebody else who's just this typical working guy hoping to just make ends meet by having this job, I like that. And just the fact that he ends up being African American or black or however you want to call it, for me it was just like, okay, it's of its time in that way to me too. It made sense in the 80s. You have New York, you should at least have because like in Crocodile Dundee, which I won't spend too much time, but like I love those movies, but like there's stuff in those movies that like are because he's got the limo driver, which he shows up in Ghostbusters, and that's Reginald VelJohnson, right? In that, because he's maybe also I'm thinking of Crocodile Dundee too, but yeah, I'm thinking of 2 where the guys, he's like a walking stereotype of what I think people thought a black guy in the late 80s of New York would be like. Probably. I mean, they didn't go there with Winston. But yeah, that's what I like love about that, and so so it would have been very easy to just fall, and like you said, they just kind of play this as a very grounded, real world thing where this just crazy stuff is happening, and you just go with it, and I think all the characters, the actors lend great things. So I love their secretary, the receptionist, Janine. She's fantastic. Quit staring at me. You got the bug-eyed thing. Louis Tully. I mean, everybody knows a Louis in their life. I mean, so it's just so, and maybe at different times, maybe we've been him. I've been him on a few occasions. Trying to get the girl to come hang out with you, and you get locked out of your own apartment or whatever. Well, I love that every time he leaves his apartment, he gets locked out. It's just that's just Louis. It's him. And then that poor moment towards the end of the movie when the what's the dog called? The terror dog. When it's chasing him and he's like outside. That just felt so bad for him. It's yes, but again, for me at least, I mean, I'd never visited New York until a few years ago, so I'd never had a reference point. And in my opinion, it was the stereotype of 80s New York, where somebody would need help and they'd all just as soon as walk by you, then even give you a hand or something. So it like that moment for me always just reinforced that stereotype. Well, and as a kid growing up, and I mean, in the 80s, I went to New York a couple times with my dad as a kid. Before I was 10, 11 years old, and I remember one time when I was 8. Looking back now, this is a horrifying story, but at 8 years old, like you just kind of accept things in this movie, I just kind of accepted what my parents did. Now, so I'm there in New York with my dad in the city. We go into the subway and he's like, wait here. He pushes me, not pushes me, but he has me stand in front of the poster down in the subway for whatever it was. And he's like, wait here, I'll be right back. I'm 8 years old, alone in New York City. He goes off to buy like subway tokens or go to the bathroom or something. I don't know what. I think he got tokens for the subway. And it's just like, this was like 1987. You didn't. I mean, this was before Giuliani, and like they cleaned all this stuff up. And my only views of New York City were what I saw in like movies and cartoons. And like you said, you get this kind of hyper realistic idea of what these cities are like. And maybe if I had seen Ghostbusters at this point in my life, that would have saved you. I would have been a little more calm. Like my dad loves telling the story, and maybe this is my racist moment as an 8-year-old driving through
Harlem at the time, and again, maybe I saw other movies I wasn't supposed to, but like every time you saw Harlem in the movies in the '80s, it was like when you said,
It was
know,
like a
when
war
like
zone or
you
something.
did not want to go. So my dad's like, oh, we're driving through Harlem, and it wasn't because of any racial thing, but every time I saw Harlem in the movies, it was like there's like fire in barrels and gunshots, like, you know, and so
and that was
my dad said I reached over and locked the door and slid as close to him as I could. And
that was just a National Lampoon's Vacation. They did that in that movie, if I remember right.
And I know I didn't see that movie as a kid, but anyway, you know, so I got to go to New York a couple times and see some stuff. So, and again, I kind of wish now that I would have seen Ghostbusters too, if I latched onto these things, but yeah, I'm glad I got to watch it with you, someone who appreciates the movie. Like, I always like watching movies with someone. If I've seen it, I've had some friends like, "Oh, you've already seen it. I don't want to watch. I don't want you to have to watch it." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? I love this movie. I want to see how you react to it."
Ghostbusters to me is just so. That's how I bond with people. Like, as a geek, there are certain ones that you automatically know. Like, I have my set of. You know, if you like Superman, I'll talk shop with you. That's awesome. It makes me excited. If you like He-Man, I'll sit there and I'll talk shop. Transformers. Ghostbusters is one that it's a couple different levels because I watched the cartoon as a kid. I could not leave the house on Saturday until I actually got to sit down and watch that entire episode, and then we could leave and do whatever. Because I
did watch the cartoons.
You did watch the cartoons, okay? Because honestly, I'll say this: I got the cartoons first. I knew of the movie, but I got the cartoons first when I was a kid, and then we ended up renting a VCR when we came up to Pennsylvania one weekend, and that and Back to the Future were the two movies my parents let us get that weekend. So I had two of the best 80s movies. It was right there, a concentrated dose of awesome that weekend.
Let us tell you about the 1980s. In the 1980s, owning a VCR was a big deal.
It was a luxury. It wasn't a necessity back then.
It was not something that everyone had. Today, you know, they're a dime a dozen, and, you know, we kind of laugh at VHS tapes, but at the time, having a VCR was like...
Yeah, and
so getting, you know, to rent movies on it, that was like a huge deal. So now with all the streaming, I'm not going to like say, you know, people are missing out, but it was a different experience.
Oh, it was like for us... We didn't get a VHS player until, I want to say probably 1988 or something. And so we would come up here and there from Baltimore on the weekends. And my dad had a little cabin in the woods up here in Pennsylvania. And so the one weekend, I remember my mom and dad were talking. We went to the grocery store to get, you know, the groceries for the weekend for meals. And my mom's like, well, why don't we rent a VCR so Sean will have something to do?
You could do that. You could actually just rent
the VCR
and take it home with you.
Yeah. That was like before all, and I was probably, I think it was 86 maybe when that happened. And so we got the VCR, and I wanted to see Ghostbusters like crazy, so my mom let me get that, and she wanted to see Back to the Future, which that was fortuitous because it's like, you know, like I wish I could relive that
just
weekend.
Come out on tape.
I think it took about 2 years for them to process those things because they both. I know they were both there because I know that was the weekend that I saw both of those movies, and for me, I just like Ghostbusters was one that I couldn't watch multiple times with my parents. My mom didn't like the language in it, and there's one scene in particular that I know damn well. I wish, I've already said worse. But I wish they never had in the entire movie because it makes no sense to me. It just bugs me. It's the only part of the movie that if I could change it, I would. But beyond that, I only got to watch it, I think, once or twice that whole weekend. And Back to the Future we had on that. That was still, my mom didn't really like the language in that. But we at least, there was more to it that we could at least watch that one without as much problem.
We should do Back to the Future reviews.
We will. We will. But yeah, Ghostbusters for me it was a big deal. I saw a review recently online that this is part of what sparked my want to do this one. There's a guy called Movie Bob, and he was talking about, is it really that good, or does it not hold up? And you know, what is it? Just the nostalgia that is why this movie is great and stuff. And at least for me, I know what I loved about the movie, and I got it on like a subtextual way, but I didn't know how to articulate it well back then. But the thing about the movie that is just brilliant is, here is a situation where you have these scientists who they are only just using science in order to do something, and they're not having to resort to, there's this secret magic totem that we have to go into the other dimension to get, or even going to the religious aspects of things, because in the spiritual way, you're dealing with, you know, the supernatural and stuff. So you'd think, oh, well, maybe they need to go and have like a priest or a pastor or whatever do something. They actually have, I want to say he's like a bishop or somebody. He's a guy from the church in the one scene. He's a Catholic priest that he shows up at City Hall, and they're saying, so, you know, what's your take on it? And he goes, you know, well, the church isn't going to take any stance on this, but if you ask me, it's an act of God. You know, it's a sign from God or whatever. And I love that that is the most really they touch on anything. What they do, it's all about the fact, it's almost like the Zootopia review we just did. It's the can-do attitude. Mm-hmm. And it's very much, these guys sat down and they actually created a thing, as in the proton packs, the traps, the containment center they create in the firehouse. They fight the things that go bump in the night, which I know is a Hellboy reference. But it's they very much, it's like, if you're a kid, kids are powerless. And part of why kids go to a lot of the things they love, like for me, I love Superman and He-Man, and I have the power, and Superman flying and being strong and all this. I'll never have the ability to be sent from a rocket ship from a distant planet in order to save me and adapt my body to have these superpowers. I'll never get the power sword from the sorceress to be He-Man. But here's these three scientists who develop this thing, and that's why Winston's the guy to me now. It's like, all I'd have to do is answer a newspaper ad if this was actually a career, and you could do this. And I hope to God that it was a career. As a kid, I wanted, like, I watched that movie going, that's what I want to do with my life. And unfortunately, it never came to pass, because there's no way of doing it the way they do it in the movies. And that's the way I want to do it. I don't want to do it like Ghost Hunters and all that other stuff. I want to do it like, here's my proton pack, I got it, you know, and have the trap and all that stuff. But the thing is, it's the can-do attitude of them. It's the fact that they develop through science a technology that makes you not afraid. And as a kid, especially, if you're watching this movie, which it can be a little dicey at points because there's some sexual overtones to it. There's an overt one in that's still like, that's the part that I wish they would remove from the movie, and that would be like the perfect cut of the movie, in my opinion. During the musical montage moment after their first big job as Ghostbusters, there's a sequence in it, and it's while they're playing the Ghostbusters theme, so you're cheering them on, and it's like you're seeing them taking on all the different jobs, and you're seeing them going all over the city answering anybody who needs help. And then there's this sequence where they're all asleep in the firehouse, and Ray has this dream where a ghost shows up in the bedroom, and next thing you know, he's having oral situations happening. And what did you do, Ray? And I always looked at that moment, because that was a moment my mom told me to leave the room. And I'd just be there like, but I want to watch Ghostbusters. She's like, you don't watch this part. I couldn't argue with her. It was her and my dad, and they'd always push me out of the room. And for me, I'm always like, why did they do that? Oh, if it wasn't for that moment, even with the language aside, it would still be a perfect movie to me. And that is that one little moment that still drives me crazy that they kept in there. But anyway, yeah, I mean, the whole thing of this, from a kid's perspective especially, I love that it empowers a child when they see this and they think to themselves, I don't have to be afraid. All I have to do is, I have to figure it out on a whole different level, and maybe it's not as scary to me anymore or whatever. There's a great, like, not an underscored message, but it's under there. It's if you look for it, it's there. But if you don't look for it, it might be back here, even though you don't know.
Because you got a proton pack, didn't you?
I built one.
You built one, okay.
I built one out of a shoebox and a backpack.
I bet that made you feel a lot braver.
No, it was, and the thing was, I wasn't even like overly afraid of that kind of stuff when I was a kid. But watching that movie, for some reason, made me go, I want to do that. And you were always the one building stuff when we were kids. You had your Legos. You had stuff that you'd make out of random things. And I'd be like, that's so much cooler than what you buy in the store. And you would be that guy.
I don't remember any
You
of
were
these
more,
things.
I remember in particular, I think you said that you didn't build it later, though, but you had that one sword that I thought was the wooden sword.
My brother
and your brother made that. Yeah. But I thought you did. And I'm like, that's awesome. And he was always doing all sorts of stuff that was like, he'd have toys, but then it would be like, he'd do 3 up from whatever it was to make like a base for them, or do this or that. And it's like the Legos kind of ignited your creativity to do more with that. And
yeah, I always take like styrofoam from like air conditioning boxes or whatever, and I'd marker them up and make it look like, you know, the base of the Death Star, because, you know, or whatever. And
even like Transformers, I remember you had a couple things here or there where I'd see them and I'd be like, you know, I wish I thought of that, or whatever. You'd be that guy. So you were like Ray and Egon combined, basically, for me as a kid. And I'd be just Peter showing up going, well, where do I play, you know, or whatever.
Well, comics.
But the thing was, like, I never was motivated to actually, like, create anything for anything that I enjoyed in that way. I'd wait for the toys to show up, because I'd be like, well, those are the official things, and you're missing the director's original intent and all that stuff.
I'm so glad you
and so, like, there was one afternoon where I watched the cartoon that morning. My parents left me alone for a couple hours to go and do some errands, and I was maybe, like, 9 or 10 years old, and I'm looking around the house going, like, well, what can I do? And then I found a shoebox. I had an old backpack that I stopped using, so I cut holes in the shoebox. I put the backpack straps through it. I pasted and taped a bunch of things on the back of it. I had this, it was I think the first one I had was, I had a lightsaber from the Droids cartoon. And it actually you press the button and the saber part would shoot out, and I was like, oh, right there, I shoot that out and it lit up, and I'm like, that's my proton thrower. And then later on I ended up there was some other thing I had that I converted, and that was my proton pack. I honestly put that right next to my bed at night, and it made me feel like, I don't care what's out there. I got this. I ain't afraid of no ghosts, you know? And then they had the actual proton pack come out later on, and that was my Christmas story Christmas. Because that was the one where I wanted that more than anything, and it wasn't under the tree, and I got really depressed. And then all of a sudden my dad goes, what's that box up in the crawl space? And he pulled it down for me, and then I ripped open this thing, and all I saw was the word proton. And my parents probably thought like caged monkeys on crack were docile compared to how I was jumping all over the place. It's like, I think the reason why it's just fitting so well into the Zootopia. This is like you got a 2 for tonight, people. No, but it was the whole empowerment thing as a child, because like I said, you know, these other things, there were always reasons why. Like, you couldn't be Luke Skywalker. You weren't in a galaxy far, far away. And all of a sudden, you had the potential, though, to fight the things that scared you. You had the potential of being a Ghostbuster, just like Winston, just like Peter, Ray, Egon. They all had that. And I thought that was amazing out of this movie.
Yeah, and to play off of that, I think, you know, yeah, you can't be Superman, you can't be Luke Skywalker. There's all these things you can't be, but the cool thing about them and the Ghostbusters is they all had attributes and personality traits that were things you could look up to. You know, like you said, it's these 3 scientists, and, you know, blue collar Winston. They're like,
well, even they were kind of blue collar, in their own way. Yeah,
but it's like, you've got these guys, and they're just kind of like, we're literally making this stuff up as we go.
I love that about it too. Yeah.
We don't really know what we're doing.
The Sedgwick proves that moment, which I love. Actually, even the Peter going to Dana's apartment to check things out proves it too.
But just, but like they kept at it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think what I love about Superman, when he's written, in my opinion, correctly, it's not about the powers. It's about who he is.
It's about the man, yeah.
And the man who's using those powers. It's about who Ray and Winston and Egon and Ray are, or Peter, how they use the tools they have. It's how Luke uses the Force, how Spider-Man uses his spidey senses and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, I mean, we can't be those people, but we can live up to the ideals we see in them, and and I think that's really cool. And back to the guy, the other reviewer you were talking about, it's like, again, I came into this movie about 5 years ago, so 2011 was the first time I actually watched the whole movie beginning to end. I'd seen bits and pieces here and there, but I'd never like sat down and like watched it. And I'm someone who, I have a hard time getting into movies from the 80s, like late 70s, 80s, if I didn't grow up watching it.
Yeah, we'll get into that with me later.
There was a little bit of a disconnect with me. Like I never really got Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I mean, I understand why so many guys got liked Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but I didn't see.
That's the only scene I know from that movie.
When I watched that movie. My old boss let me borrow it, and I watched it, and I was like it was some things are just of the moment, and if you don't kind of latch onto them at that time, maybe you miss it. I don't think Ghostbusters is one of those movies, because like I said, I just watched it 5 years ago, and I don't like it as much as you do, but I don't dislike it at all. Like I enjoy it. I bought the Blu-ray myself a year or two ago. I enjoy watching it. It's funny, the action. I mean, there's so much. And like I said, listening to my mom watch it through the up
vent
into the second floor or whatever, it was just great. It was like reversal of our childhood when Sean would come spend the night over the weekend or something.
They'd hear us probably
we'd be
watching
down in the
stuff
basement
or laughing.
watching and laughing. It was really funny. But anyway, so I think it holds up. I mean, it's definitely an of the moment, of the time, but I think it works for it in that way. Because like you said, they put the ad out. That's they're doing the TV commercial, which was such a common thing all the time, and you don't see that as much anymore, especially with internet and all that stuff now. But like, again, that was kind of an in the moment thing, but it just makes it richer, and so I think it holds up. I think it's great.
Is there anything? I mean, you liked it for the most part. Is there anything about it that didn't work for you?
Like you said, I agree with you about the part with Ray, and the montage. Like, it's like that. It was just kind of that one thing, and there's a lot of movies that have that. Like, oh, this is great. Oh, but there was that one moment that just kind of pushed that one thing too far in whatever direction. But I mean, I love the music, and not going to get into the new movie coming out this year, but when I heard the remix elements in that trailer the first time, I got excited.
Yeah, I did too.
And I'm like, I'm still looking forward to the movie. I think I'm with you. I'm cautiously optimistic.
I'm cautious, but I'm willing to give it a chance, unlike some people out there.
I think they're gonna somehow. Anyway, it looks like it's gonna be good. I like the cast. I've liked a lot of the other movies I've seen from that director, so I think it has potential to be a good movie. Maybe it won't be the same lightning strike that the original one was, but who knows? I mean, sequels and follow-ups never quite are as good as the original.
Well, even Ghostbusters 2, I mean, there was potential with that one, but for me, I felt like it hit too many of the same notes as the first one in a lot of ways. But the one thing it benefited from was it had the advent of CGI kicked in around then, so you could see almost like rendering wise and stuff, the ghosts had a little bit more going on, and like they have that moment where the painting, you see his head come out a little bit and he's watching stuff. It's like they couldn't have pulled that off. Actually, they probably would have pulled it off practically a little bit more creepy in the original, now I think about it.
And that's the thing, like, I hear people complain about modern movies, like, oh, you can totally tell such and such was CGI or blah 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 blah. It's like when you watch the original Ghostbusters. I mean, sitting in the theater, you knew that stuff wasn't real. You knew it was an effect. You maybe didn't know how it was done because we didn't have special features on DVD bonus
Unless
discs.
you were a huge geek and were reading the magazines. Yeah.
You know, you'd see, you know, some channel would have like a behind the scenes on like how they did the Rancor and some of the stuff in Return of the Jedi or whatever, or reading the magazines. But like, it's not like it is now where you see virtually the whole process if you're really into it. You know, so I think, I don't know. I think if the filmmakers and the storytellers can get you to buy into the world enough, it doesn't matter what type of effect they're using if they do the effect well.
Well, and that's why for me this movie is so, it's endearing in that way, and it's something that it never gets old for me. I love that they didn't go ridiculous with how this world was set up. The world was set up pretty much, here's 1984 New York. They didn't try to do it like, oh, it's another reality or whatever. And it's like, you know, ghost stories are something that everybody has one way or the other. Somebody has some reference to, you know, either an urban legend or something that happened to their friend or themselves or who knows. So, and they even have that one moment during the montage where the guy's like, my grandmother used to spin stories of the spectral locomotive that went by her farm when she was growing up. And I mean, that's part of why this works for me. It's never trying to elevate itself into, well, you know, these are specialized people and da-da-da-da-da and all this stuff like how it would be today. It's like, no, they set it in 1984 New York, and this was, you know, like you could drive and see the fire station and all that stuff.
And I think with the design of the ghosts in that movie, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, Slimer's definitely kind of an oddball, unique, and I think very iconic image. But a lot of the other ghosts you see in the movie are kind of what you would imagine as a kid reading ghost stories. You know, it's, you know, and I think that works for that movie. So again, back to the new, I'm curious to see, and I don't care if it's CG. I love practical effects. Yeah. But I think there's a time where, you know, there's a good way to blend the two and pull it off. So I'm looking forward to, like, the designs I've seen in the trailer so far. I'm intrigued. But again, focusing more on this movie, the way they did the practical effects at the time, I'm sure was, you know, cutting edge, groundbreaking. I mean, this is coming out 84, so you've got Return of the Jedi, some of the Indiana Jones movies, and you've seen some of these types of elements before. So no, I think it works. I think it holds up. It's one of the few movies from that time period that I've actually been able to get into and enjoy now as an adult, so many years after it debuted. Cool. So yeah, so I'd say yes, it does hold up in all the best ways. I don't really have any. I mean, it's a lot of fun. So, but speaking of 80s movies, there's another one that we'll be doing a review on somewhat in the near future, I think.
This is news to me.
Is it?
I don't know. What one are we talking about?
Goonies Never Say Die.
Well, yeah, and that's the one where I'm at the disadvantage instead of you this time, because I am the one that I have yet to see the whole movie from beginning to end, ever. I never grew up on the movie.
And we're going to change that.
Yeah, he's going to try and dissuade or persuade me into how it works.
So we'll see what happens. That's a movie, I saw that in the theaters. And instead of these movies now, I think back as a kid, I'm like, how did my parents take me to that movie, but not that movie? Because, like, Back to the Future, like you said, there's actually quite a bit of language in there.
Well, there's that, and there's also, like, I guess even when I was a kid, I was like, his mom is trying to get with him. That's really creepy. like she doesn't know, but he knows.
I guess for me as a kid, I mean, I'm kind of, for the most part, I just kind of take things as they come. I'm like, that's weird. That's his mom. Yeah. This is just like, I'm like, that's funny.
No,
like, but like now I'm like,
yeah, no.
What?
No, Marty. And thankfully it doesn't go there and stuff. But yeah, like for me at least, I know. My mom took me to see Dark Crystal.
I did not see that one.
And Watership Down.
did not see that until I was 30.
Watership Down is one that it's like PTSD. If I even think about that thing, I want to go and I need a hug, because that one.
They're remaking that.
I know they are, and I'm scared. I'm very afraid. I am like. This is like Dana in her apartment in that sequence where the glowing light is behind the kitchen door and she says, "Oh shit!" And that's kind of what I say.
Eggs?
No. It's when the hands come out of the chair.
Yeah.
That sequence. It's like that's kind of how it feels to think that this is going to be out there again in the world.
And you know what? No one. I gotta say this. No one quite delivers that line like Sigourney Weaver.
She is such a great foil to Venkman in the whole movie me in general, because I love, like,
and she's kind of the companion to Winston as the everyman.
She
character.
is. She's a cynic. She or not a cynic, but she flat out admits she doesn't believe in any of the stuff that Ghostbusters are about. Yeah. And even Winston, he's like, if there's a steady paycheck, I'll believe in it, but he wouldn't be that way either. And he actually, he mentions, I love Jesus' style in the one part. So it's like there's obviously some religious background to him, whereas with her, I just think she's somebody that she thinks that stuff is silly or whatever. Right. And I love, like, I know me in my past many times, I think I used the blueprint of Venkman to try and meet girls at times. I mean, any kid from the 80s probably has done this that's watched Ghostbusters, because there's that element of, as especially in a lot of the media of the time, there was always that, well, the guy is going to come in and solve the problem. And I love the fact that they, I'm going to solve your problem. I'm going to fix this. And then, you're going to think, what makes Pete Venkman tick? I wonder what makes him tick. I bet he'd wonder what makes me tick. I have done that many times, and it was freaking stupid. Just like, I love that they have that scene in there where, he's doing all this stuff and he's thinking, I'm coming in here, I'm going to solve the problem, I'm going to be the man, I'm doing my science thing, and she doesn't know what I'm doing, but I don't know what I'm doing either, but I'm trying to make it look like I know what I'm doing. And she does that whole, you remind me of a game show host, and it completely shuts down all the bravado he has going into that, because it's like...
Because he's essentially a glorified exterminator at this point.
Well, the Ghostbusters, basically, they are glorified exterminators, but the thing about Peter over the other ones that makes... That's why everybody loves him. He's the scoundrel. Yeah. But he's also the charlatan of the group, because he doesn't even completely believe in what he's doing. He believes in money. He's not believing in the rest of it. He's the snake oil salesman of the group in a sense.
And I love that opening scene with him with the money and girls. That's his thing, when he's got the two students there volunteering for his
the negative telepathy. Reinforcement of ESP, or studying the effect of ESP with negative reinforcement, if I remember right.
You would know that.
And he keeps electrocuting the poor kid.
And he's getting them right.
And I love, at the end, it got to a point where he got the last one right. This just isn't your day. And then he shocks him again. I love when he shocks him, and the one time he drops his gum. And then he picks it back up and puts it back in his mouth. And his hair is huge. And it made me always wondered when I was a kid, is that because of what he's doing to him? Or that's just the 80s? I don't know which. Because the other thing, too, the other thing about the reason why it's perfect you have it in the 80s category is when you see, there's a bunch of with Sigourney Weaver where just her style is 80s. And even the scene between the two of them that I was just talking about where he's trying to solve the problem and whatnot. They both have the makeup and everything in that scene is very 80s. Like there's this almost like a paleness they do in there. Mm-hmm. And every time I see it, I'm like, oh my god. And then plus when she's possessed later on and she's the gatekeeper and just the off the shoulder dress and all. Yeah. There is no day now on these rules. And she has the off the shoulder dress. I mean, it's like, oh my god, these are and even they play Laura Branigan at the party that Lewis throws and stuff. It's like this is so of its time, but oh my god. And even Gozer, the look of her, it would only work in this era of now.
The only other person that could have pulled that off in any other time was Bowie.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah. I was actually thinking Brigitte Nielsen. You were gonna say or something.
well,
where she had the flat top.
I don't
All they
think
had to do
anyone's
was
going to
just spray her.
challenge. I don't think anyone's going to challenge her. About
Well,
anything.
you'd have to cross the streams. I think that's what Stallone did to try to divorce her back in those days. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, I am a huge fan of the Ghostbusters. I mean, I'm not actually. I'm a fan of the movie and the show and the toys. But anything ancillary since then, I've just been kind of like, I like that. I'm very much that way and annoying in a lot of ways with anything in that, like any franchises or whatever. After it gets to a certain point, it's like, I just like this part. You guys can have the rest. You know? And
would you say the new things are ruining your childhood?
I'm never gonna be that guy because number one, the quick and fast thing about it is, the minute that I heard that Harold Ramis died, I already knew I didn't need a third Ghostbusters, because if they can't get all four of them together on screen for one more movie, and especially him, especially Egon, he's one of those characters that you gotta have Egon in the movie. Like Ray, Egon, Peter. I'm not gonna say Winston doesn't have to be there, but those three are the guys that started it. Those three are the ones that should end it. You know, in my opinion. So since they couldn't get the three of them in the same room again to do this, there's nothing about the new one that's ruining my childhood. There's nothing about the new one that's anything horrible to me. All that it turns into is, this is just now a new take on it and whatnot. And granted, this is coming from a guy who completely destroyed the Batman v Superman thing because of how Superman's handled, but the difference between those for me is, Superman as a character needs to be Superman in order for me to believe he's Superman, and these movies didn't prove that to me in any way, shape, or form the right way, whereas the Ghostbusters is a title, and the Ghostbusters they don't have to always be Peter, Ray, Winston, and Egon. It can be different people. And the fact that this time around it's now women, to me it's like, well, that's kind of pushing it in a whole nother direction, because I get the first one was all men. I would have liked to see maybe like 2 girls on the team and 2 guys on the team, or you know, maybe 1 guy and 2 girls or something. Right. Some mix of it in a way. But this is what we're getting, and it is what it is. It's not ruining my childhood in any way. So, and it bothers me that there are people out there that feel that way, because you know, this might actually turn out to be its own fun and its own
that's the thing, like you were saying with Superman, it's not. I mean, unless the returning characters that are coming back to it, or at least actors, I'm assuming they're playing the same roles, whether they're cameos or whatever.
I don't know. I actually heard they're doing they're not going to be Peter, Ray, or Winston.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I heard they're going to just have these random parts.
Okay.
As far as I've read, at least.
Well, there you go. So I mean, it's not even like an alternate version of Superman or an alternate. It's a whole new thing.
Yeah, that's why it's easier for me to divorce myself of that.
Yeah, and even if it was continuing on from the original story and they were playing their original roles even in cameos, unless their personalities are completely flip-flopped, it would still be the same guy,
Yeah.
So it's like, we'll see what happens.
To just throw the what ifs out there as like a final thing at this point, and wrap up. Like I thought about it and I'm like, okay, we have the new all-female Ghostbusters coming out. What would I have rather seen other than this if I could have made this movie? And I only thought of 2 options that I thought could have been fun, and then the one option as a runner-up, I guess I want to say, is go online and Google Max Landis Ghostbusters 3 script. What he does with that, it gives enough ode to the original 2, and it gives enough to open up the idea of a future using new characters, but you still had Ray being like the team leader of the Ghostbusters after everybody else has left. You have a nod to the fact that Harold Ramis can't be back ever again to be Egon, but his daughter's on the team, and she becomes a Ghostbuster to establish link to her father and learn if she can breach the astral plane to meet him again or whatever. And Peter, I forget what Peter did in the thing, but Peter went off. He took the money and ran because they became a franchise. And Winston kind of became like the president of Virgin Mobile or whatever. He's kind of like this Richard Branson type character who he invests in a bunch of other things, but he also still has his heart back in the Ghostbusters in a sense too. And he does an amazing job. He doesn't post the whole script, but he summarizes what he wanted to do with it. And I actually, I teared up reading it.
You told me. I really like what you told me.
It's the moment between Egon's daughter and her finally reaching out and being able to hear her dad's voice again. It got me. The other moment that got me is there's the sequence where she is the last Ghostbuster left in the firehouse because of the events leading up to this moment, and there's stuff happening, and she has to walk with her proton pack down the street in order to confront the big evil in this. And all of a sudden there's people lining up on the streets and they're cheering her on, and all these other Ghostbusters are showing up from all the different franchises around the nation, and they all have to go up against this thing. And it's like the mayor is actually Walter Peck, the EPA guy, and he calls them to, and it's like, I'm reading this and I'm weeping like a baby, going like, everything about this is like, it would have been such a summation of the two that I love, and this could have been a great one going forward. The ones that I came up with really quick were just as what would I rather have seen other than the new movie. I was like, well, they didn't do like a Ghostbusters Begins in a sense where you understood why the three of them wanted to do this. And on the cartoon, they established that Egon actually wanted to start being a Ghostbuster because the boogeyman kept on coming after him at nighttime in his bedroom and scaring the hell out of him when he was a child. So that was a huge key component in him needing to study science and figure out a way to prevent this from happening, because it still happens to him as an adult that happens on the show. And I love the idea that it could have gone into, well, what is the reason why these guys, and I'm not saying I want to see that version for the fact that then you have to recast all the Ghostbusters again.
Right.
The other option I was thinking was there could have done a real world Ghostbusters, which the meaning that I have of that is Ghostbusters as a property has become something that there are people that they actually dress up in the suits, they create their own, working to the point where, you know, they don't shoot the particle throwers, but they're working proton pack replicas and whatnot. And I was like, well, what if they actually used the first movie, and maybe even the second, as a key for people in our world who say, you know, maybe we can use something from this and fight something that's now a problem in our world. And it's like the real world version where they take that as, this is their inspiration to go forward and like develop weaponry to fight a ghost or something here. And granted, both of those I don't feel are even remotely worth holding water to make a movie around. But I'm like, that's the only other options I have, is like, these are my contributions to those of you who feel this new one sucks. Well, you come up with something. It's like they wanted to do the Ghostbusters went to hell in the third movie. Apparently Dan Aykroyd was pitching that one, and that was one of the few where I'm like, I wouldn't mind seeing them have to fight their way out of the 7th level of hell. That would have been, but the amount of CGI probably would have turned it into Spawn back in those days. And all I keep thinking is the horrible rendered the Satan in that one, and the way that the fire of hell was, and it's like, I don't want to see the Ghostbusters being marred with that kind of stuff. I mean, they fought a painting in the second one. That's the best. Yeah, they already went to hell. That's fine.
How many 80s franchises can you see go to hell?
Well, there's a few they remade that I think they pretty much went to hell for that reason. Poor Bodie and Johnny Utah.
Did you watch it?
I did not. I actually would like to, because I think it's like ridiculous.
My quick little tag for the remake of Point Break. Now this is embarrassing.
You've seen it.
I never actually watched the original Point Break.
Oh, you haven't? We're doing that one then. Oh my God. I am an FBI agent.
The new movie is...
You had to remember to spell it. It was brilliant.
The new movie is visually stunning. And I wasn't thinking about it, so I can't remember the guy who plays Bodhi in this movie. But his performance is riveting, I think.
Edgar Ramirez,
yes,
I think?
He's great. The guy who plays Johnny's not...
I don't know his name, but I know they made fun of him a lot online.
Is it a great movie? No.
The first one wasn't a good movie either.
It's not a great movie. It's visually impressive. Basically, the remake is like, okay, let's shoot a bunch of really awesome and probably CG enhanced, extreme sports sequences, and let's throw a story around it. Yeah. Oh, we'll just borrow the story from this one.
Yeah.
But halfway through the movie, they keep forgetting to tell you the story, and you just keep seeing all these really impressive sequences, and it's like... And then they're like, oh, wait, throw Johnny in there. He's got to say something. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm after for this, blah, blah, blah. And it was one of those movies that it just could have been, not necessarily great, but it could have been a lot more entertaining.
It probably could have been more entertaining if they didn't connect it to the original and make its own thing.
It felt like they tried too hard to recreate with the modern eco thing. Again, I haven't watched the original one, so I don't know how... They didn't do that in the original.
Like, it was more, they had like a hippie mentality.
There's some of that.
We're not trying to get in with the man. We're trying to do our own thing, and this is how we're financing it.
So there's some of that. There's some of that in there for sure.
They basically went across the world trying to find the waves. They were about that stuff. They were about
this
surfing.
one. There's a more a spiritual thing to it in this one, I guess, or maybe it's similar. Again, I don't know. But like, there's like this one guy who had like the 7 or the 8 like things that you had to do to reach total enlightenment, and
I actually saw this scene online. They said like one person could take all of his life to perfect one of these things, and they wanted to do all 8 of them. It's like, okay.
And I think the biggest thing for this movie, and I'm one to talk.
They needed Vin Diesel,
but there's a moment that I was like, okay,
I ride these waves a quarter of a wave at a time. I am Groot.
Oh,
I can't help it. It's Vin Diesel. I had to mar it, but yeah. Anyway. We aren't Groot. I'm talking about Ghostbusters. I'm happy, but anyway, go with your.
Beards seem to be the big thing in this movie.
Oh. You'd fit in.
No, I wouldn't. There's, I don't know.
I'd fit in. Mine's not nearly yours.
I don't know. But
anyway.
It wasn't horrible. Paying $2 at Redbox was... I don't feel like I wasted any money.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got back to the Redbox on time. I will say that. But anyway, Ghostbusters.
Yeah, Ghostbusters.
I love the original. Obviously not as much as you. I haven't had as much time with it, but I like it. I'm glad I got it. I'm glad you had me sit down and actually watch it.
I am too, because it blew my mind. You never saw it to that point. But
Superman.
That one's going to be an event.
That's
because after everything that we've gotten through to this moment, you've seen Man of Steel, you've seen Batman v Superman. You're now reading Superman comic books, and it's now like you need to see what started this for a lot of this generation, especially because that came out 2 months after I was born. So it's like, it's very much like, hey, I feel hand in hand with this. This is my Superman, and they can recast him, and that's fine, but it'll always be, this is how the feeling of it should be. So yeah, we're gonna do some more of these like retro reviews, or I don't know what we'll call them right now, but or we could call them look backs or something. I don't know, but. There's movies that I know I haven't seen from the 80s that, like Goonies, for instance.
And I haven't seen Point Break.
And he hasn't seen Point Break, which
the sad thing is, I actually owned that DVD for like 10 years and never watched it.
The thing is, tonight is a hot fuzz night, because we referenced Judy being like Nicholas Angel. I couldn't help it because it reminded me of that when I was talking about it.
You got a Power Grayskull in there at one point.
I got a Power Grayskull, and On top of that, this is now my Nick Frost moment.
Have you ever followed two?
Have you ever jumped through the air while shooting one gun? Have you ever shot an air up in the air and go arg? And all that. And it's like this is why these movies are in existence, so that Nick Frost and Simon Pegg can riff off them and be brilliant like that.
And now I wanna do those now. Because I love those movies.
But anyway, the Simon
Cornetto
Pegg
trilogy.
yeah, we should do that one too. That's a good one. We'd have to do all three.
Absolutely.
Lump sum. But anyway, yeah. So Ghostbusters, and I'm glad to have not introduced you to it, but just I'm glad that you got to see it.
I was aware of its existence
and enjoy it.
You had me shake its hand and say hello.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, here's a buddy of mine, Pete Venkman, Jesse Arnold. Boom. and yeah, I mean, it was a lifelong dream of mine watching it last week to actually see the final epic conclusion of the movie with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man showing up. I mean, if there was ever a moment that is just, this is defining this movie, and that's, again, the comedy side of it for me there, it's like, yeah, it's a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I love that. It's,
yeah,
you just want to hug the thing. It's gorgeous. But yeah, it was a lifelong dream of mine to see the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man along with the Ghostbusters on the big screen at some point, and I'm glad I got the chance to do it. The last time they re-released it, I was going to be married only a day or two later, and I'm like, yeah, I can't do that.
Well, this time you got to go with your
I got to go
wife.
with my wife, and
So,
we both were grinning from ear
bonus.
to ear, and she actually was actually more excited than I even was to do this because I've seen it so many times, and I'm like, I don't know if I get more out of it or not. And when you have a group in the theater and they're enjoying it and laughing at all the stuff that you love about it, you're laughing with the fact that you know they're enjoying it too. So, you know, and there were even kids in the audience, and I'm like, man, I wish I was that kid tonight, because God, that would be so awesome to watch it this way and be like a kid and see it in this the way it was meant to be seen. But anyway, yeah, Ghostbusters. Glad to see the re-release. I think the last time that you could see the re-release was yesterday evening. So I don't know if they'll ever do one again or not. Glad I got to get to this one. Glad you got to shake hands with it because I made you sit down and watch it. And we will be back for more of these kind of reviews in the future, either separately or together. And anyway, if you reach the end here, congratulations. And for now, I'm the Baldy.
And I'm still the Beardy.
He is. He did not shave in this interview or whatever. There's no CGI. And
What is there?
oh, he wasn't. That would have been awesome. That would have been awesome. Oh, I'm keeping this in too. That would have been so awesome if I would have been like, if I would have put my hand through you and be like, he wasn't here the whole time. Like Ghostbusters. It would have been so awesome for that. I hate the fact that we're on such a small budget. Okay, anyway. And until next time, we'll see you later.
So long.
There is no day now on this.